Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today's session. We have an exciting hour with you on adaptive radiation therapy. My name is Seth Blacksburg. I'm a VP and Chief Medical Officer of the Americas of Accuray, and we have a great talk today. So we know during the course of radiation therapy that there exist inter- and intrafraction anatomic variations. The target volume can change. You could have a biologic response. There are random anatomic changes in organs at risk. And there are inter- and intra-fraction bladder and rectal filling occurrences. And we know there are independent movement and deformation of multiple targets, such as with respiration and peristaltic motion. And all this can compromise the dosimetric treatment objectives. The historical methods of compensation have been population-based margins and image guidance, which consequently results in larger irradiated volume. The concept of online adaptive radiotherapy has been around for decades, and the clinical implementation has been hampered traditionally by technical limitations. With adaptive radiotherapy, we're trying to adapt to these patient-specific changes that are unaccounted for in the initial plan. So by applying deformable image registration to estimate daily dose with updated contouring and plan re-optimization, we hope to take into account these changes that occur. And there are many novel approaches in production that have been explored, and they range in sophistication and in trade-offs. Some of these involve patient-specific margins, having plan libraries such as plan of the day, and having daily plan adjustments. In terms of classes of adaptive radiotherapy, image guidance radiation is known to all of us. Offline adaptive involves adapting between fractions, which could take hours or days, and one is assessing and modifying plan in between fractions to adapt to progressive changes that necessitate a need for replanning. The question always comes up, what is the trigger and the threshold? And there are considerable variations in practice. Online is adapting before treatment within minutes. So you image a patient in the treatment position immediately prior to delivery, and we know that many interfractional treatment variations have a shorter time scale, with offline adaptive being insufficient. And so with online, the plan is adjusted just before the treatment delivery, and the highest yield seems to be when there's significant interfraction anatomic change that corresponds to a region with a steep dose gradient. So you can imagine a prostate SBRT plan if the rectum is getting a considerably higher dose than anticipated. Real time occurs during the treatment delivery, and that should be on the order of seconds. So offline and online adaptive modifications neglect intra-fraction motion. So real time or inline adjustments occur during treatment, and one moves the dose distribution based on how the patient's anatomy changes during the actual treatment, and it requires substantially more automation than offline or online adaptive. The requirements of adapting intelligently involve high-quality volumetric imaging and registration, and then really paying attention to contouring and optimization tools that prioritize speed and quality. There are workload and workflow considerations that are not trivial, as well as training. From a 10,000-foot view, adaptive addresses treatment delivery uncertainty, but it's important for us to be cognizant that the adaptive process itself can introduce its own uncertainty, such as with cumulative dose. There are contouring uncertainties that can translate into sometimes large DVH uncertainties. There could be noise with daily data accumulation, and certainly there could be uncertainty with image deformation and planning. We have an excellent session for you today. Raphael Merkley from Lausanne, Switzerland is going to give a lecture on Accuray ClearRT images used for real-time adaptive RT, example of breast treatments in partnership with research. We have Andre Haraldsson from Regional University Hospital in Lund, Sweden, who's going to give a lecture on clinical evaluation of head and neck adaptive real-time dose optimization, calculation, and QA with RayStation. And finally, we'll do performing real-time target tracking with dynamic delivery on the Radixact system, which will be a lecture that's been pre-recorded by Dr. Matthew Whiddon over at NYU Winthrop Hospital in the US. And so now I'm going to introduce our first speaker. So Professor Raphael Merkley is the head physicist in the Department of Radiation Oncology in Lausanne University Hospital in Switzerland since 2001. He's an associate professor with his main fields of research, including flash therapy, TomoTherapy, and multi-criteria optimization. His presentation today is Accuray ClearRT images use for real-time adaptive RT, examples of breast treatment. So let's welcome Raphael. All right, I'm going to get you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? It's very strange that I don't hear myself, in fact. But that's okay. See, if you hear me, that's okay. So, first of all, my conflict of interest, this travel is paid by Accuray, and I receive an honorarium of that. And I have a funding of a PhD project, which is given by Accuray. Also have a conflict of interest with research for artificial intelligence automation in radiotherapy projects and partnerships with Intra-fx, PMB and CERN for FLASH projects. So adaptive radiation therapy, what is needed for adaptive radiation therapy? So first of all, we need real-time imaging for, which is the most important, we need images. And for what? For having the possibility to contour or to auto-contour daily the structures, and also to auto-calculate the dose daily. The other important point is we need an efficient flux between the systems, particularly between the imaging and the TPS, and between the TPS and the treatment machine. And finally, hopefully, we would like to be able to do some sort of QA of the whole. So. The question I try to answer today is, can we do that with X-rays instead of something else? So this is particularly related to RadixAct that you understood. And so now I'll talk about real-time imaging. So the system, the RadixAct system is the same than the previous TomoTherapy, in the sense that there's an MVCT with an MV detector which is able to provide MV images. But there's a new tool which is a KV-CT with a source and a detector, and this is what we will talk about. And the kind of image we can obtain with that, with the patient on the table, is the one on the right, compared to a normal planning CT with contrast. So what we did from this information is we did some post-processing with tools that already exist on RayStation, mainly also scripts. So the first thing to do is to do a registration between the planning CT and ClearRT, so that we can have information about possibly information that is missing on ClearRT for large field of views and things like that. This is not absolutely necessary, or not always necessary, but it can be. The tool is also removing the low frequency artifacts. And then there's a conversion of the Hounsfield unit so that we can use the ClearRT for doing the dosimetry. So the tool is a CBCT converter, because this is the tool that exists on RayStation, but it's exactly the same if we wanted to do that with a CT to CT conversion. And as I said, if the field of view is small, we can add some parts of the planning CT on the ClearRT CT, so that we get all the information we need. So this is an example of the change, and you won't see anything probably. You won't see any difference between these two things, but still there's a bit less low frequency artifacts, and the homogeneity is a bit better. But this is the kind of image we can get with the patient on the table for doing the job we want to do for adaptive. And the first thing is the daily structure contouring. So we have, in collaboration with research, we have validated a model for auto-contouring for the thorax and particularly the breast. What you see is the result of the validation on planning CT, so on normal CT, so to say. And you see that, well, there are some differences, but that are mainly related to the way the contouring is done in our department, and not really about real differences. What we have done is that at the end we validated the fact that we don't need to contour the organs for this kind of pathologies, and we can do that automatically with the tool. And this will be available on version 12A, if I remember well. And then we applied that model, that AI model on ClearRT images, and this is an example of on the right, we just apply the same model but on other images, because this might be related to the quality of images. And what you can see there, this is just an example, but what you can see is that the contouring is pretty good. I don't know if you may have another opinion, but at least for me, this is pretty good. And that means that we can auto contour from ClearRT images so that we have the contours. And the second step is to be able to do the calculation and an auto calculation. And we did exactly the same, but for that calculation. So we research developed a model for auto calculating the dose with an AI tool. And you see there the differences in particular. Do you have a yes? Do you see my? No, you don't see it. Okay. On the right, upper right, you have the DVHs, and you see that, well, we don't see so much the difference. Maybe the interesting thing is the table on the bottom right, where you have the evaluation for 5 different cases of the dose distribution for the PTV coverage and for the organs at risk, with different versions of the model. And at the beginning, the model is not so good, but the more it is green, the better is the model compared to the manual planning. So when you have a dark green, that means that the machine is doing better than the physicist. So it works. And then we applied that on ClearRT images. And this is what you see on the bottom left. We applied that on the KVCT, and this is an example of what could happen or what could be the difference between the planning CT and one KVCT taken at fraction, say 15 or whatever. And you see on the bottom right that there are dosimetric differences, which means that we should, or we would have wanted to adapt that plan, because the dose distribution would not be the same today compared to the one of the planning. So it works, we can do that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the QA. So you know probably that the TomoTherapy is working in producing a sinogram, which is a description on how the leaves are opening and closing during the irradiation. What we are developing with Accuray is a tool that is measuring the leaf open time with the detector, so with the embark detector, the MV detector, so that we can measure during the irradiation what is the leaf open time, and we can compare that with what is planned. So on the left you have the planned sinogram, which is what is expected to be delivered. In the middle, the delivered sinogram, and on the right, the difference in milliseconds for all the leaves during the irradiation. So there are differences between the planning and the delivery, and the consequence is that we may have also a dose difference. So that tool allows us to, not to QA, but at least to report what happened during the irradiation. And then we can do we can play with that. So on the upper graph, you have a certain number of patients, and this is the difference in the leaf open time, average difference, and the distribution of the difference in the leaf open time, and you see that you have different things that may happen. And on the bottom, even more interesting, this is a single patient, but with all the fractions of the treatment. So we can do that for all the fractions, not only before the start of the treatment, but each day, which is something very interesting, because then we can also adapt according to what happened today. And the other interesting thing of that tool is that it is sensitive in differences. So that means that when you have a difference, a mean relative leaf open time error this is the graph on the left, and you compare that with the D95, you see that there's a correlation between what we measured and what is the quality of the plan, which is absolutely not the case with the gamma index that you can see on the right. So in summary, we have real-time imaging, we can auto-control daily structures, we can auto-calculate daily dose. The flux is something this is not secondary, this is the key, but I don't talk about that because this is not, what I talk is not implementing for clinical routine. And the QA, which is something very important, because in fact we are able to monitor what happened during the treatment, which is not the case for the potential solutions. So at the question, is real-time adaptive RT possible with X-rays? The answer is yes. And I have just a small acknowledgement from colleagues that work hard for getting this information. Thank you.
Talk, and these are wonderful conceptual frameworks for performing adaptive radiation for breast cancer. Question for you is, how feasible is this to do actually in a clinic, and what are the hurdles that you see in doing so?
So I don't see any hurdle. This is all about integration. I think all the tools are there, particularly the imaging. So when we have the imaging, we can do artificial intelligence will anyway do the job at a certain point, so that's not a problem. And we have the images. So this is about integration, and I think that there's no fundamental problem to implement that clinically. There's some work to do, or maybe a lot of work to do. I don't know. This is the other people to answer that question. But there's no fundamental problem that makes that we couldn't do that. And probably André will talk about that because they have done it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So while we're setting up the next slides, just to remind folks, the acoustics are really good if you plug in your earphones into the device. And we'll load up the next talk here. So our next speaker is Professor Andre Haraldson, who holds a PhD and a Master in Science in Engineering Physics and Medical Radiation Physics. And the title of his PhD was Helical TomoTherapy for Total Marrow and Total Skin Irradiation, Optimization, Verification, and Clinical Results. He's conducted research and clinical activities in Lund for well over a decade, and at Regional University Hospital focuses his grant-funded research on individualized radiotherapy and motion management. His presentation today is on clinical online adaptive radiotherapy, optimization, dose calculation, and QA. So let's welcome him.
Yeah, hi, I'm Andre Haraldsson from Lund in Sweden. I will be presenting regarding clinical online adaptive radiotherapy and its use in helical TomoTherapy. So, this is my disclosure slides and disclaimer. So, radiotherapy is, of course, a technical-driven treatment modality, and over the decades we've had innovations such as multi-leaf collimator, in-room imaging, intensity modulated radiotherapy, and now artificial intelligence has paved the way for stereotactic radiotherapy, simulated integrated boost, motion tracking, and now adaptive radiotherapy. So, of course, for most NNA cases, a single plan is created and a target margin of 3 to 5 millimeters is used to account for the daily challenge that are very patient-specific. So, we have fraction-to-fraction variations that like setup, organ movement, sometimes even swelling, but predominantly, of course, for head and neck cancers, we have weight loss progressively over the treatment for over many fractions. So, we have a reference CT from weeks ago when patients lose weight and the target shrinks, and so thus the organ is at risk. So how do we adapt to this challenge? Of course, you can do adaptation with standalone CT, but it's quite resource intense. So if you want to do it from scratch, you do reference CT, you do planning, and you do the whole plan QA 9 yards. So it's resource intense, and so it is if you do it offline with built-in imaging during or between fractions. So then, can we change the plan to adhere to these relevant variations? So of course, there's a synergy of technologies to adapt. We have image, deformable registration, contouring, assessment planning, and quality assurance to be able to adhere to this. So the challenge is, of course, it's often slower and more resource intense than EGRT, so it's worth the trouble. So to cite another author, the key to enabling online art into clinical mainstream practice is the majority of a suite of synergistic technologies working in concert. Of course, the rationale for adaptive radiotherapy is well established, especially for offline use. We have, for example, Jensen here that proved that adapting during the course of the treatment is relevant for the target of the coverage. So, and also there's a publication that showed that 2-year local regional control was better in the replanning group, and a variety of quality of life measures. It didn't affect overall survival, but still there was something there. Still, a survey of the use of art in Europe published in 2020 involving 177 different institutes in 40 different countries found that only 10% of the public sector used online or offline protocols, but 45% made ad hoc offline adaptation. So there's more work to be done. So online adaptive helical TomoTherapy then on the we have now the technical solution to may facilitate this online adaptive radiotherapy. So I will present the feasibility with a suite of technologies where we use KVCT imaging and the radiotherapy system together with the ray station planning system. So we're testing the individual components for this and at its early stage of integration. But we have basically a CT Linac with a helical treatment and a very nice radiotherapy planning system where we have also have deep learning auto-contouring and this hybrid intensity deformable registration. So adaptive radiotherapy then though. So we have selected patients with different disease and challenges, of course, and we evaluated the software then with optimized to daily plans then on these corrected KVCT images done with bulk density model. We also looked at some QA concepts similar to Raphael showed and did a workflow assessment on this. So these are the selected cases we use, and of course this is cases that we expected to somehow have an advantage of adaptive radiotherapy. There was some weight loss on this patient, so it's a qualitative research on a case basis. This is the systems we used in Synergy for this research and our generation 1 and 2 imaging system together with a clinical beam model. So we looked at the optimization workflow, the daily workflow and the decision support in the system, and the daily workflow would look something like this. So you have imaging done on daily on the machine, and then you do registrations on the machine, then you hold for adaptive plan. You do in the planning system, you do deformable registration and image enhancement with the bulk density model. Dose planning, of course, optimization, and you do evaluation and hopefully some automatic QA solutions here on the parameters. Then you have a choice between the adaptive or the previous plan on your machine side, and then you go further to treatment delivery and further the evaluation. So of course it's interesting on the time scale of this. I won't comment so much. It's simply because we did this work on a standalone PC with of course like some at the early stage of integration. So but the process takes a few minutes. So but it's not the optimization process that will increase the treatment time significant in this process. So we did a case-based comparison. Then we had a reference plan, and we validated that on the daily CT called the PlaneRef Daily, and also did the daily adaptive plans on the fraction that had KVCT imaging. We accumulated those back to the daily evaluation reference and also adaptive plan, of course, back to the reference CT. Of course, this is a case-based feasibility evaluation. It's not quantitative research, so we can't determine how often adaptation is better than not. It's more like we see it's a feasible way to do it in this suite of technologies. So the deformable registration is a hybrid intensity. Also we did some deep learning structure delineation on some selected organs at risk. It's a bulk density correction that creates a synthetic CT based on the information you have. Of course this was not the main part of this research, but we did verification of the bulk density correction, and not much to add here. The recent upgrade to ClearRT has done improvements significantly. Of course, when you simulate an online workflow, we need to be transparent with the way we adapt the plan. So we didn't change the optimization criteria at all during this for the adaptive plans. We simply kept the same optimization criteria, and we did it 2 or 3 times and looked over the target coverage. So of course then it's important to have optimization criteria that always work on all your organs. Of course there's this built-in decision support you can put in your clinical goals. So we have our normal clinical criteria that we use for evaluation for this study. So how did it go? So we summed the dose here for selected dose coverage criteria. So here we have in green the reference plan with 1 mm CTV to PTV margin and the plan adaptive. So there's no no big differences generally between these. This is how many grays you have in the dose coverage difference from the goal values. It's more, it doesn't show up on so much on the sum dose. It's more a few fraction miss or hit scenarios. So we'll look more into this. It's similar for organs at risk. Here we had the adaptive plan minus the reference plan. You see, so that means if it's on the positive side, you have more dose with the adaptive plan. So similar here, you have generally the adaptive plan performs better for the organs at risk, but there are some organs at risk that have more dose from the adaptive plan. It's the organs at risk that are into the target, so they are prioritizing the target coverage with adaptive plan, and hence a bit more dose to those organs at risk. But if we look at the clinical goals, and so we null the baseline to the reference plan and the reference CT, meaning so that's the number of achieved clinical goals on this. So the adaptive plan in green, you have the reference plan progressively over the fractions in orange. So generally the adaptive plan keeps a robust number of clinical goals achieved over the progressive of the treatment. But for some patients the reference plan deteriorates over time. It has to do with weight loss, and here you have the supraglottic, for example, had the most weight loss of the patients, and so in the end they had a lot of clinical criteria that didn't fulfill compared to the adaptive plan and the reference CT. So it gives adapting the plan gives a more robust results daily. Here's an example of the dose coverage we had. So here we have the there. So you have the nodal volumes, and the light green then would be the 95% criteria for the 54.4 gray. So you have a near here with 3 millimeters. You have a near miss on the nodal volume. You're losing a bit of target coverage. This is for the 33rd fraction. And for the reference plan with 1 millimeters calculated on the daily CT, you definitely have miss of the nodal volume, but for the adaptive plan, as you expect, you have full target coverage for the nodal volumes for this fraction. And the results look similar if you look at those volume histograms. So here you have the reference plan on the reference CT in solid. Reference plan calculated on a daily CT in dashed, and dotted is the adaptive plan. So the adaptive plan keeps your values close to the reference plan, of course, on the daily CT, more or less, both for the orange at risk, where you have more dose with the reference plan than with adaptive plan to the orange at risk, and similar with the target coverage. You keep without the plan, you keep it the way you want to treat it, unless to getting deteriorations because of the weight loss. Of course, then we simulated the daily workflow then with this suite of technology. So we had RayCAD where we created the patient, did a workflow, did the dose planning in RayStation, simulated the treatment on our standalone PC, and then we did reporting back to RayCare. Then you could do dose accumulation and plan adaptation in RayStation. But the other end, it worked great, so it was no problem to do this workflow with the suite of technologies we had at hand. So this is how the daily workflow look for online art or offline looks in RayStation. So you get reporting for each fraction, and then you can do adaptation, accumulation, and so on a day CT, and look over and also scale it to the prescribed dose to get a feeling of where it's going with this patient. So, of course, we need quality assurance in online adaptive radiotherapy, as Rafael presented very nicely. So what to do when we can't do planned QA measurements prior to treatment? Well, of course, planned complexity benchmarking, independent dose calculation, and delivery analysis together in a suite of solutions that are feasible to use in this type of situation. So we looked over the plan complexity then on these adaptive plans, and here you have a number of different complexity metrics. It's how many MLC patterns you have open during the entire treatment. You have the gantry period, even the calculated the plan stenogram time variations, couch bed pitch, and so on. The reference plan here are in the filled colors, and the dashed colors are all the adaptive plans for that patient. So generally, here we have a few plans that are more complex than the reference plan. So This is why you need in advance would want to calculate a lot of adaptive plans and see that it's feasible to deliver on the machine this type of treatment, so you don't have too complex treatments that you have adapted. And the results were similar for all patients, that you had some adaptive plans that were more complex than the reference plans. So, of course, this is something you need to QA prior to starting the online adaptive. Independent dose calculation, nothing new, but of course it's important to do it robust and fast enough in an online workflow. So there's more to be done there, but this is now implemented in many clinics, I think. And as Raphael mentioned, you have delivery analysis, and has been had it for several years in the Radixact and the TomoTherapy. So there's a suite of technology where you can compare the MLC delivery compared to the planned one. And as presented, I mean, it would be a great solution to have a live one where you can adhere, look over the fraction by fraction and analyze the pattern and see if there are some consequences to the patient's treatment. So adaptive radiotherapy, of course, has been extensively researched for several decades. We're seeing implementation on offline and online today. So adaptation, of course, will be a daily decision and will pave the way for improvements for the patients, hopefully, well, with reduced margins, safer delivery, and some literature will create better patient outcomes. So is it less resource intense? Yeah, we'll hope so. And there's a lot of work with doing adaptive radiotherapy if you do it manually. But as far as our group can tell you, with this suite of technology, we have a less resource intense way of doing adaptation. So it all comes down to the integration, of course. You need a good decision support in the system. You need a robust daily workflow to work with the system. We need QA that are feasible and relevant. And of course, in clinic, you need to have a decision delegation, when and how and what are the decisions you will base the adaptation on. And this still, it will up to the clinic to decide this and work with the systems. There's a lot of work to be done, but thus far it looks as that we can move towards doing more planned adaptation and less patient's adaptation on a day-to-day basis. So, thank you, and thank you for a great collaborations with Accuray and RayStation.
Andre, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. Quick question for you. Do you see any regulatory difficulties or challenges with online radiation therapy in regards to plan verification or QA?
Yeah, so I think we have a different solution, a different situation in Sweden maybe than some other countries of the world. I mean, generally you have where the regulatory is that you need to verify the plan versus the delivery prior to treatment or at the same time as the treatment. I mean, traditionally this was done with in vivo the old measurements, but now more and more clinics are moving towards you do independent dose calculation with some systems. Sweden is a bit different. They have interpreted it as you should do measurements of the plan prior to treatment. So so then there's a question if how would you do that and how have a discussion regulatory to move past this. I think definitely we have the technical solution and the Linux are robust enough to do just doing independent dose calculations and those type of verification. But regulatory we will see, I guess, and get the answer soon enough. So,
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So just want to remind folks that as you exit on the left-hand side, there will be lunch for you to pick up, just in case you weren't aware of that. And I'm going to load up our next talk. So our next talk is going to be a video from Dr. Whiddon. Dr. Matthew Whiddon is the chief physicist in the Department of Radiation Oncology and the director of the Division of Cyberknife Radiosurgery at NYU Long Island School of Medicine, where he supervises the technical aspects of the radiation treatment as well as the comprehensive departmental quality assurance program. He obtained his undergraduate degree from Johns Hopkins University and his PhD from Columbia University in applied physics with a concentration in medical physics. Dr. Whiddon holds a patent in the area of evolutionary computation and treatment planning optimization. He presents today on adaptive radiotherapy, real-time tracking, and compensation with the Radixact, and I'm going to load his talk.
Hi, I'm Matt Whitten. I'm the chief physicist.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm Matt Whitten. I'm the chief physicist and the director of the CyberKnife Center here at NYU Langone Hospital, Long Island. I'm sorry I can't be with you in San Antonio, but I'm excited today to participate, at least virtually, in this symposium on adaptive radiotherapy hosted by Accuray. Special hello to my colleagues Andre and Raphael, and to Seth, who's hosting this session. The topic of my talk today will be adaptive RT, real-time time tracking and compensation with the Radixact. What do we mean historically when we talk about adaptive radiotherapy? Well, the concept was introduced by Yan in 1997, and really it related to the treatment plan being modified using a systematic feedback of measurements. So adaptive radiotherapy intends to improve radiation treatment by systematically monitoring treatment variations and incorporating them to re-optimize the treatment plan. So in this process, the field margin and the treatment dose can be routinely customized to each individual patient. What we're talking about is that it's an initial conception. Adaptive RT involved only modification of the treatment plan itself to compensate for deformation of the patient's anatomy. The goal here was to adjust the treatment plan such that it took into account the state of the target volumes and the organs at risk at the start of any given fraction. Here's the traditional adaptive workflow. The patient shows up, you put the patient on the table, you image the patient, you deform the contours or recontour based on the image you just took to give you the snapshot of the patient's anatomy that day. Then you re-optimize the treatment plan on those new contours and then treat the patient. What have we done here? We've re-imaged and we've imaged, contoured, and re-optimized prior to delivery. And that's certainly better than just relying on the image that we had from when we simulated the patient and the state of the anatomy at simulation. And we just assume it's all static. But there can be changes which occur over time. So of course, we take those into account by imaging. But imaging and contouring prior to delivery still only provides a snapshot of the patient's anatomy at a given point in time. So is the notion of just imaging the patient and recontouring, re-optimizing the plan, and then go ahead and blindly treating, is that sufficient? And is that really truly adaptive? What happens during treatment delivery? We have image, contouring, and re-optimization pre-treatment. So we have adaptation there. But then during treatment, we don't have any adaptation to how the anatomy might be changing during the fraction, intrafractionally. So I think what we need to do is expand the concept of what we consider to be adaptive RT. So the historical definition of adaptive RT allows compensation for interfractional changes in the patient anatomy, that is, changes between treatment sessions. But it does nothing to compensate for intrafractional changes in patient anatomy, that is, those changes that occur during treatment, visceral motion, excursion with respiration, or any other movement during treatment. So what we need to do is we need to revise our understanding. We need to change the frame of adaptive RT to include methods for addressing both inter and intrafractional changes in patient anatomy. What I like to say is that if you're only imaging, contouring, and re-optimizing prior to treatment, but you're not correcting for changes during treatment, you're only solving 50% of the problem. So how does one compensate for intrafractional changes? We need to image during treatment delivery. We need to detect the motion of the target, and then we need to displace the dose distribution in real time to compensate for the motion of the target. And how do we do this? Well, things have changed since 1997 and the initial paper on adaptive RT. Both the Radixact and the CyberKnife allow for real-time intrafractional motion compensation. That is, you can track the motion of the tumor, you can detect this motion, and you can correct for it in real time. So you're actually displacing the radiation beam, changing the aperture, moving the aperture in synchrony with the motion of the target. So we do this on all of our patients who are treated on our 3 CyberKnife units. 100% of these patients, we utilize this track, detect, correct ability, this synchrony ability on the machine. And we also are excited to use it on the Radixact as well. So how does this accomplished on the Radixact? Well, they have a ClearRT imaging system. That's a KV imaging system with a KV tube and a cesium iodide detector. Here's an example of what it looks like. To give you an idea of just how good these images are, here's an example of a ClearRT image from a prostate case we treated. You can see it almost looks like a SIM image. Here's an example of a head and neck case we treated. And here's an example of a lung case. See in each image just the quality that we're getting out of the KV imager, the ClearRT image on the Radixact. So we can really, with these sharp images, detect the motion of the tumor and correct for it. It'd be harder to do if the imaging weren't as good as it is. So just to clarify a popular misconception, this track, detect, correct ability is much greater than gating. It's not gating. What gating does is it simply shuts off the beam when the target excursion is larger than specified limits, and it requires a larger margin. Track, detect, correct is real-time displacement of the dose distribution. Again, it is not gating. The beam stays on as compensation for target excursion occurs, so therefore you can have much smaller margins. So on the Radixact, you can track targets of up to 8 centimeters in length and motion of up to plus or minus 2 cm. And there are 3 tracking modes. One is fiducial, which uses a position model to predict the position of fiducials based on 2D radiographs. The other is fiducial with respiratory. So we attach LEDs to the patient, and we develop a correlation model to predict the position of the fiducials based on the respiratory trace and the 2D radiographs. And the third is lung with respiratory. So we do fiducial-less lung tracking. And how is the target motion compensation achieved? Well, we use JAWS to correct for motion in the IEC y-axis. And the MLC sinogram, that is the MLC aperture, is shifted at each projection to correct for motion in the IEC x and IEC z-axis. So imaging angles are selected during planning, that is the number of radiographs one takes during a gantry rotation. But they can be modified at the treatment delivery console on the fly as needed by the therapist. And we use 2 to 6 angles. And imaging, by the way, is accomplished while the treatment beam is on. So here's the guts of the Radixact. You can see the KV source and the KV detector, and also the LINAC itself and the MVCT detector over there. And that's sort of how we use the machine. The LINAC to deliver the treatment, and the KV source, the KVD, to take the radiographs to monitor the position of the target. So for respiratory tracking, we have this optical camera that's mounted on the wall that monitors the position of the LEDs. The LEDs, as I said before, we use to develop a correlation model with the fiducials to predict where the target will move. Here's a flow diagram for a non-respiratory treatment. I'm not going to get into all the details, but essentially what happens is one acquires a radiograph, adds it to the model, makes sure that the model is valid, make sure that the target excursion hasn't exceeded the threshold, and then basically use that model until we take the next radiograph. So similarly with respiratory tracking, you're acquiring data, you acquire an image, you add it to the model, you build a new correlation model, you make sure that the target excursion hasn't exceeded any limits, and from there you just update the model. Here are some clinical examples. This is a prostate SBRT case, 8 gray times 5. What you see here is implanted fiducials, and the fiducials are used, again, to detect target motion and the compensation again occurs sup and inf with the Y jaws, and also the X and Z axes. We compensate for that motion by shifting the MLC aperture. So here's a fiducial-free SBRT lung. So this is respiratory tracking that's accomplished without any implanted fiducials. Here's another example of a fiducialist lung case, SBRT. You'll notice how tight the margins are, because remember, you don't need an ITV if you're actually tracking, detecting, and correcting the dose distribution in real time. So here's an example again of a fiducial-free SBRT lung case, and you can look on the left-hand side of the screen is a track, detect, correct synchrony case, and on the right-hand side you see a lot more dose spillage and larger margin, because that uses an ITV. So we see a lot of tissue sparing when we do fiducial-free lung tracking. We are actually track, detect, and correct for tumor motion. So thanks for your attention. I hope I have motivated you to reconsider your conception of adaptive RT to include not just compensating for interfractional changes in patient anatomy, but also for intrafractional changes in patient anatomy. So goodbye from New York, and while you're in San Antonio, check out the Alamo. And if you can, check out the basement and look for Pee-wee's bike.